Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolute tactical brilliance of a man who managed to successfully frustrate a global superpower for nearly 2 decades. You know, when we think of military resistance, we almost always picture these massive winner-takes-all battles. But today, we're looking at a completely different kind of genius. We're talking about a literal masterclass in survival, adaptation, and just pure stubborn willpower.
Okay, picture the scene for a second. It's West Africa, 1898. The French colonial army firmly believed their long, exhausting war in the region was finally wrapping up. I mean, they had the numbers, they had the modern industry, and they basically had the map painted in their favor. But they were dealing with a completely uncatchable foe.
Just imagine the absolute frustration of the French military command. Every single time French troops marched in and seized a city, they'd find out this guy had already abandoned it. And every time they tightened the net, thinking, okay, we finally trapped him, he would just vanish. Then, out of nowhere, he'd materialize somewhere completely unexpected.
Because this wasn't just your standard tactical retreat, no way. This leader was willing to burn his own capital to the ground before letting the French take it. Really think about the logistics of that for a second. He literally relocated a massive empire across hundreds of kilometers on foot. He moved his people, his resources, his soldiers, the whole shebang, just so he could rebuild and fight another day.
So who was this guy? Well, to his enemies, he was without a doubt the most maddening opponent imaginable. But to his people, this brilliant tactician was Samori Touré. He was the founder of the mighty Wassoulou Empire and the man who spent almost 20 years of his life resisting the colonial conquest of West Africa. Section 1. The Merchant's Son. Now, to really understand how he held off a superpower, we've got to rewind. Touré didn't exactly start out as a king. He was born around 1830 to a family of Jula traders in what is now southeastern Guinea, which was a region going through some massive transformations at the time. And in a crazy twist of fate, his life changed forever when his mother was captured during a regional conflict. To secure her freedom, Touré willingly surrendered himself into the military service of the ruler who held her. It was this huge act of sacrifice that, ironically, taught him the exact skills he'd need to become an emperor.
Those early years serving as a captive soldier, they fundamentally shaped everything that was to come. He didn't just quietly serve his time, he studied. He completely absorbed the crucial tenets of discipline. He learned all the intricacies of command, and most importantly, he learned exactly how wars in this rapidly changing environment were actually won. So he goes in as a captive, but he emerges as this truly formidable leader.
Section 2. Building the Wassoulou Empire.
So throughout the 1860s and 70s, Touré starts expanding his influence, chiefdom by chiefdom. But here's the brilliant takeaway. He realized pretty quickly that doing things the old way just wasn't going to cut it in a changing world. So he adapted. He built this highly organized professional fighting force. We're talking infantry trained with modern firearms, elite cavalry, and a tightly centralized command structure. He even managed to secure imported weapons by tapping into these long-distance trade networks that stretched all the way to the coast. It was a real game changer.
By the late 1870s, all of this massive reorganization culminates in the sprawling Wassoulou Empire. With its really vibrant capital at Bissandougou, this powerful state stretched across parts of present-day Guinea, Mali, and Côte d'Ivoire. But right as Touré was consolidating this magnificent empire, European powers were literally standing over maps, getting ready to carve up the continent.
Section 3. The French Invasion.
Right around the 1880s, European flags were rapidly popping up all across Africa. Nations like Britain, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, and France were all being driven by this intense desire for territory, resources, and, international prestige. It was a chaotic scramble, and the pressure on local, sovereign states was just absolutely immense. And France? Well, they didn't just want a few random plots of land. They had this highly specific grand strategy. They wanted to create a continuous, unbroken chain of colonies stretching all the way across West Africa. There was just one massive roadblock in their way. Samori Touré's expansive Wassoulou Empire was standing directly in their path.
Neither side was willing to yield a single inch. So, this immovable object, meeting an unstoppable force, sparked the Mandingo Wars in the early 1880s. The French military marched in completely expecting your standard, predictable colonial campaign against a traditional kingdom. Instead, they walked straight into a buzzsaw. They met an incredibly adaptive, modern opponent who completely refused to play by their rules.
Section 4. Scorched Earth Tactics. Okay, here's a huge takeaway for you if you ever face an opponent stronger than you. Touré was a realist. He looked at France's undeniable advantages, the modern industry, the endless reinforcements, the devastating artillery, and he knew a traditional battlefield clash would be total suicide. So what does he do? He changes the game. He uses unparalleled mobility, he executes strategic withdrawals, relentlessly attacks their vulnerable supply lines, and just ruthlessly abandons any territory he couldn't defend.
But he actually took it even further than that, rolling out a totally devastating scorched earth strategy. He ordered his own people's crops, supplies, and even settlements to be completely destroyed right before his army retreated. The goal here was simple but brutal: deny the advancing French colonial forces any usable resources whatsoever, basically starving them out as they marched deeper into his territory.
Just take a second and really think about what that means in practice. It's an unimaginable, heart-wrenching sacrifice to ask your own people to destroy their homes and their harvests. But Touré operated under one unshakable belief, and it was this: losing land was infinitely better than losing independence. Land? You could find that elsewhere. Freedom? You could not.
And you know what? This strategy created an absolute nightmare loop for the French. They'd expend massive amounts of resources and manpower just to capture these empty, burned-out towns with literally nothing to eat and no one to rule. Meanwhile, Samori Touré preserved the one thing that actually mattered: his army. Because as long as that professional fighting force survived, the war continued and the empire lived on.
Section 5. The Greatest Gamble.
But look, a global superpower wasn't just going to pack up and go home. Exhausted and frankly embarrassed, France began deploying new commanders and applying relentless, crushing pressure. And as we wrap up this explainer, we're left looking at this staggering reality. For nearly 20 years, one man's brilliant adaptive tactics held off a modern global empire. But it really forces us to ask, what unimaginable sacrifices will Touré have to make next as this pressure forces the greatest gamble of his entire life? And ultimately, can an empire built on constant movement and resistance actually survive when there is simply nowhere left to run?